He came here all the way from London to share a new way tech can empower the vision impaired. Joining us now is Tiernan Kenny, Head of Communications and Public Affairs at Wayfindr.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry you have to stare at me in this surely unflattering bright light. I'm Tiernan, I'm from Wayfindr, and I'm going to chat to you very briefly today about the work we're trying to do to enable people who are blind or vision impaired to travel independently, underpinned by mobile technology. So, oh, thank God, so many of you came back from lunch. I was terrified it would be empty. This is reasonably important, I would argue, because at the moment there are 253 million blind people in the world. That number is increasing really rapidly, mainly due to the world's aging population. So there's one study that estimates that this number could treble between now and 2050. So that's quite a drastic increase, and will have an impact on society in an awful lot of different ways. Now, people who are blind or vision impaired are much more likely than the general population to be unemployed, live in poverty, and suffer from social isolation. And the barriers they face to everyday mobility are a major driver of those challenging outcomes. So from our work in the UK alone, we know that half of blind people say they don't leave their homes as often as they'd like to, and 80% of them face serious difficulties when they're trying to use public transit. Very often you find blind people have one or two very negative experiences trying to use public transport or trying to travel by themselves, and it kind of leads to the world shrinking where they have kind of 3 or 4 places they're comfortable going to, but they'd be very unwilling to travel somewhere they'd never been to before. My granddad lost his sight about 10 years ago, and I've just been kind of watching his world shrink since then. So Wayfindr got started back in 2015. We are a partnership between a charity called RSBC, the Royal Society for Blind Children, and Us2, which is a design studio. They made a mobile game called Monument Valley that you might have heard of. So with RSBC, we were working with a group of young vision impaired people in London and talking about kind of challenges they would face in their lives and potential ways to help them overcome them. And one of the issues they highlighted was the fact that they couldn't use the London Underground, the metro system in London, independently without kind of human assistance, was a massive barrier for them in terms of being able to get out and about, socialize with their friends, or kind of enter and remain in the workforce. And being teenagers, they were all kind of avid smartphone users, and smartphone technology can do an awful lot in terms of accessibility. So they said, you need to go away and find a way for us to be able to get out and about on the underground just using our smartphones to guide us around. So you said, okay, that's a reasonably good challenge. A lot of blind people would use navigation apps based on GPS when they're outdoors to help them travel. But obviously, once you go indoors, the GPS signal becomes very weak or distorted, and very often they're on kind of very accurate indoor maps, certainly not to the level of accuracy you might need for a person who is navigating without the use of their sight. So we came across this idea of audio navigation or audio wayfinding, which is basically an augmented reality wayfinding solution where you push audio messages to users that help them understand and navigate through their environment. We threw together a fairly rough prototype app, and we did a few trials with Transport for London that served as a really good kind of proof of concept and proof of demand for the technology. So there's a picture up on the screen of one of our testers in action. So this is where it gets a bit interesting in terms of the approach to scale that we took. You might know that this kind of mainstream indoor navigation market is growing quite rapidly, underpinned by kind of IoT and all sorts of other trends. And there's research that estimates that by 2022, a quarter of the times we use a navigation app on our phone, it will be for a journey that is either partially or entirely indoors. So as I said, we are at the end of the day kind of a subsidiary of a charity. So we looked at this kind of global market and said, we're maybe not going to kind of compete on investment or innovation here. And we know that this kind of massive market is coming anyway. What will potentially be missing is that accessibility and inclusion angle. So for us, the main point of impact was on having a standardized user experience for vision impaired people. That would mean that any type of indoor navigation app they picked up would be able to give them information in a way they could understand and relate to and use to get out and about. So we were very lucky to get a grant from google.org back in 2015, which went a long way towards allowing us to develop an open standard for audio-based wayfinding for vision impaired people. So rather vaingloriously, we call it the Wayfindr Open Standard, because if you don't have a brand, you have nothing. So we finished up to kind of the first version of this in, I suppose, early 2017. And then we realized that, to be blunt, anyone can make an open standard. It doesn't necessarily make anybody go to use it. So we began to look at various different forums where we could kind of promote, first of all, the existence of the standard and make it easier for people to implement it. So we approached the International Telecommunications Union, which is a UN agency. It's actually been around since the 1860s. And it looks at standards for telecommunication, including the accessibility of information and communications technology. So they took the work we'd done into their own work program, and they approved a version of the standard. It has a very long technical name that you can find if you Google Wayfindr Open Standard, because that's much easier. So this means the standard we've produced is recognized in every country around the world that's a member of the United Nations, which is either 193 or 197. I'm never quite sure. I'm also not quite sure what the US is going to do with it at some stage. Too edgy. OK, there's the limit. So what we're really trying to do at Wayfindr is, now that we have this standard in existence, absolutely free for anyone who wants to use it, it means anybody who's making an indoor navigation application, be it an app or kind of a browser-based system, has all the tools and all the information they need to make it accessible to people with sight loss, which, as I've said, is a growing market demand. So we are going out to really kind of try to evangelize the existence of this standard within that specific community. So to do that, we have made our own Wayfindr community of organizations who are interested in some level in helping us on our mission. So that would include an awful lot of vision impairment charities in the UK and around the world, and an awful lot of technology developers. So at the moment, there are apps in Turkey and Israel that have tens of thousands of monthly active users that provide audio navigation that is underpinned by the Wayfindr Open Standard. So for example, if you go into Israel, every branch of McDonald's provides audio navigation that uses our standard. So as I've said, 253 million blind people in the world. We're at the stage now where we have tens of thousands of monthly active users, but we are on the cusp of this rapidly emerging market. So we're really hoping in the next 2 to 3 years, you will see, first of all, a massive explosion in terms of indoor navigation technology. And if we do a good enough job, and if I do a good enough job talking to people like you, a massive explosion in the availability of accessible indoor navigation technology, which will have a transformative impact on the lives of vision impaired people. Thank you.